Welcome to Gavels Down, Voices Up with me, Rachel King. This is where we leave convention at the courtroom door and dive into your real stories, bold and unpopular opinions, and change-making ideas that really shake the legal world up and change where change is desperately needed. I'm here to shake it up, talk about unfiltered insights, and amplify voices that need to be heard. So are you ready? Let's get it. Put the gavels down and the voices up. Welcome back to Gavels Down, Voices Up. My name is Rachel King, and today we're going to talk all about breakups. I know I shouldn't be that excited about it, right? But I am so excited about this topic because I don't think it's talked about enough. And we all have gone through a breakup, or we know somebody. I can't imagine. I don't know that there's any person I know that hasn't gone through a breakup, absent some itty bitty child that hasn't even gotten themselves into the dating world. So we're going to talk about breakups, not divorce, because divorce requires marriage. And for this episode, I'm going to focus on all of us that have ever been through a breakup, not married. It sucks, right? Breaking up is so hard to do. Isn't there a song about that? So let's get into it. I'm going to tell you some stories because I think one of the big issues that I see is that people don't want to get married because the divorce rate is so high, or because some of the laws that are in place that can cause you to have to give up half of your property or pay support when you otherwise wouldn't have to. And so we have this migration maybe of decision making and younger generations who are choosing not to get married because they don't want to. They're financially independent. They want to maintain some of their independence outside of the law. That's fine. But that comes with consequences. And just because people aren't getting married doesn't mean that they're not shacking up like my grandparents used to say. Still getting together, still joining their lives, living together, having kids, doing all of the things. And when they break up, sometimes it's even more of a challenge than when you're married. First, if you're not married, you typically don't have to go through the court system when you're breaking up. The exception might be if you're in a domestic partnership or you've registered somehow that way. Also, if you have kids, you may not be in the court system for a breakup, but you might find yourself in the family law court system for custody or child support, right? And visitation, but we'll get to that. So the worst thing that I ever had to deal with was a very close friend of mine. And here's what happened. Had the most fabulous boyfriend. They were truly perfect for each other. They both had careers. They were very smart, fun, and they decided that they were going to take their relationship to the next level and move in together. So happy for them. They didn't want to get married, or at that point, they didn't want to get married yet. Right? So they move in together, they buy a house, they continue to grow their careers for a few years, and then they decide to have children. And during the time that they were having children, they still weren't married. They thought, you know what, if it's not broken, why fix it? So they just continued to stay unmarried. They had beautiful children. She decided to stay home. They talked about kind of how they were going to raise their children, and they both agreed that it would be great if she stayed home. Fast forward 10 years. Life happens, finances happened. They didn't spend as much time focusing on their relationship. So, like many people, they found themselves breaking up. And she called me in tears one day and she said, "Oh my gosh, I don't know what I'm going to do. The house is not in my name." Because it didn't matter when we started living together, again, not married. She said, "I've stayed home for 10 years to raise our kids. I don't have a career anymore. I've been out of my career field for 10 years. I don't even know where to start. I have no savings. I have nothing because I relied 100% on my boyfriend and our joint lives together because they'd made all of the decisions and all of the plans as though they were married, but they weren't." Hardest day of my life. I had to say, "I'm so sorry. You don't get the house because you haven't contributed to it financially. You don't get support for yourself because you're not married, and it's spousal support and you're not a spouse. So you made all of these decisions, the same kind of relationship decisions that a married couple makes, but you made them without being married." And I had to tell her that she wasn't protected legally from a marital point of view. It was devastating. Absolutely devastating. The 401k that he had been contributing to, she didn't get any right to. They did split some of the furniture, but you're still having to buy all new furniture, and she didn't have a job. She had to go back to a minimum wage job, and it was stressful. It was more stressful than I think I've ever seen any relationship. The good news is that they did actually do as amicable a division as I guess Eustace could hope for. He did not offer to pay any kind of support or share the assets, but they were able to figure out how to co-parent and stayed out of the family law court system from a custody and visitation perspective. He also voluntarily paid child support for an amount that they would be agreed on. That sucks. And you know what? It wasn't anticipated. Why? Because when you're starting your life with somebody, when you make the move to live together, you're thinking always that it's going to last. You're not thinking about the other end. But oftentimes, there is the other side.
And now for a quick break. This episode of Gavels Down, Voices Up is proudly brought to you by King Law Firm Attorneys at Law Incorporated. We're not just about winning cases, we're about making a difference. Whether it's family law, probate litigation, or standing up against elder abuse, we bring experience, empathy, and excellence to the courtroom. At King Law Firm, we're more than lawyers. We're your team, in your corner, advocating for your rights and making your voice heard. Visit us at thelawyerking.com and on the socials at The Lawyer King to see how we fight with you and for you. King Law Firm Attorneys at Law Incorporated, where your fight becomes our fight. Now, let's get back to today's episode.
I knew this other person who got into a relationship, again, long-term relationship, I guess for what you would consider long-term, high school sweethearts, graduated high school, both went to college, stayed together through a community college experience, ended up moving in together, right? They were very young at the time. And I say long-term because a long-term relationship that you start in high school and maybe goes till 6 years, I would say is pretty darn good considering how much you change over those years. So they get an apartment together, they move in together, they're both on the lease, they both work, and they decide, hey, we should get a dog. Because isn't that where we all start, is thinking, well, if I can take care of a dog, I can take care of a kid. So that's what they did. They got a dog, they both contributed to the dog, they loved the dog. Then they finished college, one dropped out, one graduated and got their career going, and they moved in separate directions. So they decided to break up. What did that look like? Well, they were both on a 1-year lease and they couldn't cancel that lease. The landlord did not care that they were breaking up. The landlord said, you're on the hook. Problem was that they couldn't afford the apartment individually. So boyfriend couldn't come in and pay for the entire apartment on his salary, and girlfriend couldn't either. They needed each other, but they couldn't break the lease. So now they both find themselves trying to figure out, do we stay living together even though we're breaking up? And I can't even imagine a more awkward situation than having to continue to live with somebody that you were in a romantic relationship with and then you no longer are anymore. So that was what they had to decide. Do we continue to live together broken up, or do we break our lease and then who's going to be on the hook financially? Big decision, and a hard decision when you're not getting along anymore. Remember, there's always that time where you're going through the emotional part of a breakup, and it can be really challenging to come together on some of those joint decisions. The other thing that they had to figure out was what's going to happen to our dog. They both loved their dog so much. It was their baby. Problem is, in the law, a dog is property, no different than your silverware. So who's going to take it? That was really hard for them. And then to the extent that they're going to be sharing this dog and coming up with some agreement that they can both handle, now you're on the hook dealing with an ex-boyfriend or an ex-girlfriend all the way back from high school until the dog passes away. I don't know if that was what they were thinking about when they got the dog. Nonetheless, it did not turn out exactly as they were hoping in that particular situation. They could not figure out the dog. It turned into a huge to-do. Both of them wanted the dog. Nobody was willing to concede it, and nobody was willing to share. And they ended up screwing the lease, and now they both are on the hook financially for the whole thing, and they're having to get their credit destroyed. I bet they didn't think that through. In fact, I know they didn't think that through. And you might be thinking, well, I heard one time that there was custodial rights and visitation orders that can be done for pets. You are absolutely correct. You can, but you know what you have to be? Married. That's right. If you are married, then a pet could be something that the court considers making some kind of custody visitation arrangement on, but they weren't married, remember? So we had to go back and look down the records, who paid for what vet bills, whose name was on the license, all of the things. And when you aren't married and you don't have kids together and all you want to do is move on to the next step of your life, who wants to be dealing with that headache? I'm guessing no one. And lastly, what do you do when this happens? Because it's fun to live together. Relationships are great. Maybe you don't want to be in a relationship for the rest of your life, but you're willing to see where this is going to go, but you're not willing to sign on the dotted line for marriage. Maybe you got divorced and it was such a horrific experience, you're never going to get married again, but you still like the idea of having a companion and going through life with somebody else. Fear not. As long as you talk about it beforehand, it can be okay. For example, for my friend, they started out getting along. Maybe that would have been the time for her to say, hey, if I'm going to be staying home with the kids and stopping my career for our children and our family at this point, I need to be a joint on this house. That way, if something were to happen down the road, which it did, she would have had a joint equity situation. There's also cohabitation agreements that can say, hey, if I get a dog or if we get a dog, we're going to share this dog. This is both of our dog, right? So while you're getting along, it's better to have these conversations. They're hard conversations, but it's better to have them now than try to have them when you're no longer getting along and you are in the middle of a breakup. I would say the things that I would look for if I were getting into a cohabitation, non-marital relationship is, what assets do we have and what assets are we buying together? Or what debts do we have and what debts are we getting together? Because if you're not married, then whoever has the debt, whoever has the asset is going to be the one that walks away with it in most cases. So if we're going to be making these decisions and getting new furniture from a furniture store and putting it on my credit card, maybe we want to talk about what's going to happen since it's joint furniture or a joint debt. That house, what's going to happen? How are we going to handle a breakup when we're not married and we don't have the legal protections? And I get it. Many of the reasons people don't get married is to avoid the legal hooks of marriage. But I also have yet to meet a couple who decide to move in together who are already planning the divorce. That doesn't mean it doesn't happen. I get it. But I've yet to meet one. And so I would say for the most part, you want to be aware of the decisions that you're making and what could happen if the relationship doesn't go the way you're planning, because you want to always look out for yourself. My name's Rachel King. This is Gavels Down, Voices Up. I'd love to hear about any of your cohabitation nightmares, or better yet, let's focus on some successes. Until next time. Thanks for tuning in to Gavels Down, Voices Up. Like what you heard? Then don't just sit there. Subscribe, share, and tell me your thoughts. I'm Rachel King, bringing not just my opinions to the mic, but about the courtroom too. Your part, keep listening, keep engaging, and until next time, let's keep those gavels down and our voices up. Unmistakably up.